Now, there's no denying that the Hyundai Creta has you more or less covered with everything that you might want from a family car until you want to stand out from the crowd, which is where the Tata Curvv comes in. Now, this striking coupe SUV shape aside, how do these two cars stack up? What's different and what's very similar between these two? Let's find out. It'll surprise you to know that the Creta is the longer car here and the Curvv the wider one. It just goes to show how design can play tricks on your perception so easily. Both follow the modern playbook of sharp LED lighting and big grills. There is a sense of familiarity to both, the Creta from how many of these you see and the Curvv from being derived from the Nexon. But these ICE versions of the Curvv do stand out a bit more with their distinct grille. The Tata's larger wheels add more drama, but the Creta's bodywork carried over from the pre-facelift version doesn't quite gel with the more angular new additions. The flush door handles look great on the Curvv but are a pain to use when your hands are full. That being said, the Curvv has more ground clearance at 208mm against the Creta's 190mm. At the rear, the notchback of the Curvv is an attention magnet and quite a departure from the flat, clean shape of the Creta. You may also say that the Curvv looks a bit bulbous from some angles, but this trait seems a play for more attention, in which case it works. Now, there's always that impression that you are making a compromise with this stylish coupe shape, especially in terms of boot space maybe. But in the case of the Curvv, that's not really true. For example, to start with, you have a powered function for the tailgate. You can also do the kick adjustment thing. So opening the boot by itself is not a hassle, and in terms of space too, this has 500 liters compared to the 433 of the Creta, so you're already starting off on the right foot. Having said that, yes, the lip is slightly higher, so picking up items is a bit more difficult, but once inside, the space actually is quite useful because it's a large square box. Yes, this notchback shape means that maybe tall items will be a bit difficult, but like I said, the square shape of the boot floor means that you can stack a lot of stuff quite easily, and there's a 60-40 function as well. Now with the Creta, of course, it's much more straightforward. You open it as you would, but immediately, yes, it's not as deep or as wide maybe as the Curvv, especially with these pockets on the sides and with the slightly intrusive wheel wells. But putting in heavier items is much easier because the lip is low and the edge is completely flat, so you can just slide things in. And just like the Curvv, you have a 60-40 split function as well. Both these SUVs come very well equipped. They have most amenities you might want in a car, but a bigger differentiation comes from safety. Both give you ADAS, but the Creta has a more natural system. It feels a touch more reliable, but if driver assistance is not for you, the Hyundai lets you switch it off completely. With the Curvv, it defaults to on every time you start the car. That being said, the Curvv is the only one here with a full 5-star safety rating. Now, if you are coming up to these cars from smaller hatchbacks or sub-4-meter sedans, they're very easy to get used to, both of them to drive, because you have a good view out. You sit fairly high up in both. In the Curvv, I feel you sit slightly higher up, maybe the range of adjustment is a bit more. But you can see exactly what's in front of you. The bonnet sort of pans out in the way that you would like it. So straight ahead, visibility is great in both. Now that being said, the Creta is slightly better to maneuver in tight situations. Because of this, you see the large A-pillar. It's something that we've seen in the Nexon that's been carried over here. This kind of blocks your view a bit more here than in the Creta. So that's something you have to get used to, and also the mirrors. Now they do a better job than the ones in the Creta, but yeah, you have a blind spot that you need to be careful of. You will find a 1.5-litre turbo diesel in both these cars, with the one in the Creta being the same tried and tested Hyundai Kia unit we've seen for some time now, while the Curvv gets a heavily updated iteration of the motor from the Nexon. This motor has the edge on paper with its 118 PS and 260 Nm against the Creta's 115 PS and 250 Nm. But as our 0 to 100 kmph tested times show, the two cars are dead even at 12.9 seconds, despite the notable difference of the Curvv being paired with a 7-speed DCT and the Creta a 6-speed torque converter. A point to note is that the Curvv doesn't need diesel exhaust fluid dosing. Now, while these two engines might be very similar on paper, the way they behave on the road is a bit different. Now, the Creta, it feels
a touch more refined at idle or at low speeds like we are doing right now. It's quieter at these low RPMs and generally smoother. There are a few vibrations that come through, but as you keep revving it out, I think it's the curve that sort of contains the noise a little bit better.
A lot of this boils down to the gearbox. The Hyundai's transmission is better able to keep the car in its power band and seems to favor drivability over efficiency. Despite the Curvv using a DCT, it's quite conservatively tuned. It takes a while to give you a downshift, say when you want to overtake, and seems to be quite keen on choosing the highest gear possible. In effect, you find yourself losing momentum, which takes away from the experience you want from a solid, torquey diesel. But the more conservative tune of the Curvv has its benefits when you drop to the fuel pump. It's quite a bit more efficient than the Creta, both in the city and to a larger extent on the highway, where the 7th gear truly makes a difference. We managed 15.84 kmpl in the Tata and 14.37 kmpl in the real world in the Creta.
Now, like we said before, the default normal mode is pretty much the only mode that you need to drive the Creta, and it sort of does everything that you want to in that mode. There's no point really of switching it to the sport mode, especially with this diesel powertrain. You already have a narrowish power band to play with, although like I mentioned, the Creta utilizes that power band slightly better. But I must say that with the Curvv, there is a bit more range between the drive modes. So the Eco is really quite focused on saving fuel, which makes it a bit difficult to use in the everyday, I must say. I think this default sport mode is good enough, especially if you're driving on the highway and you aren't looking to save that much fuel.
Speaking of not saving fuel, the Curvv is the more engaging of the two cars to drive. Yes, the steering is quite light and more attuned for use in city driving conditions. The Creta has a bit more heft that adds confidence, but the difference is marginal. The Tata seems to stay more composed on a winding road. The nose turns with a bit more enthusiasm and body roll is better controlled. Around higher speed bends, as you might find on highways, you find that the Creta tends to start running wide a bit earlier than the Curvv, which if you like driving takes a bit of fun away from the experience.
Now stepping into the two cars, the immediate first sense that you get is that the Curvv is a more modern, more plush space, and that's largely because of the color palette that Tata Motors has used compared to the quite simple beige and black of this diesel Creta. Here in this top spec trim, this accomplished plus trim, you get this sort of burgundy-ish, reddish kind of finish. You get this silver kind of metallic textured finish. The plastics have a bit more texture to them, at least visually. There's a bit more that gloss black going around, a bit more the silver. So in that sense, yes, it does look like this is a more plush space.
Now, soft surfaces are limited to armrests and other common touch points in both, which is a bit of a letdown at this price point. You get neat ambient lighting highlights, however, but this is more richly executed in the Curvv. We have complained earlier of this new Creta having dropped a grade in material quality, which now narrows the gap for Tata Motors. That said, the Curvv still has more work to do in fit and finish. You notice sharp edges and uneven panels around the center console, unlike the Hyundai. The Creta's switchgear too feels of a higher standard with a nicer damped action to most buttons and stops, which in many cases is replaced by touch panels in the Tata. These need some effort to get used to, quite unlike the natural feedback you get from physical buttons.
Now coming to the overall functionality of this space, I think the Creta does it better. To start with, it generally feels airier. While this may look more plush, that with the lighter cabin and generally of it feeling like a wider space. So even though in terms of specs the Curvv is wider, the Creta actually has the wider cabin, so you sit a bit further away from the passenger, the door is a bit further away from you, the roof is a bit higher, and the light color palette, like I mentioned, it just sort of gives you a more open feel. And that sense also carries over the kind of space that you have in your footwells.
The Curvv's touchscreen is larger at 12.3 inches against the 10.25-inch unit in the Creta, with a big difference coming from the seamless wireless phone integration, which the Creta lacks. The Tata screen is also more responsive and is easier to navigate menus. The Hyundai comes back with a more intuitive driver's display. The fonts and dials are easier to read, the Curvv hampered by the screen being quite far away from the driver as well.
Now moving on from space and coming to usability, again I think the Creta does it slightly better. While this looks nice and modern, yes,
maintaining this gloss black panel is quite difficult, and you do have some nice stylistic cues with this toggle kind of arrangement for the gear shifter. I think the Creta is much easier to use. The Creta has the more natural seating position. The front seats offer more adjustment and the steering wheel is at a straighter angle to you. That being said, the Curvv's 4-spoke steering wheel feels a touch nicer, but the buttons are slightly difficult to operate here. They're not as tactile as in the Creta, and also a slight gripe is the horn, for example. It's not as easy to press as in the Creta. Now, some other things that I wish the Curvv had done a little bit better is interior space. Now it has a big glove box, which the Creta is slightly smaller. It's 2-layered, so that's great. But you do realize that this cabin being derived from the Nexon, a lot of that car's sort of shortcomings have been carried forward. For example, this arrangement here, if I were to put my phone in the center, the only place to put it really is here, and it keeps moving around. And you don't really have as much storage space in your doors. Both give you Type A and C charge ports, but the wireless charger is better placed in the Hyundai. As with most SUVs, you and your family will be spending a good deal of time in the backseat. It also won't come as a surprise that the Curvv and Creta styling play a big role here too. And generally too, since the Curvv is based on a smaller car than Nexon, yeah, it has been lengthened a little bit and the dimensions are different, but you do notice that in the backseat, where you notice that the Creta has quite a bit more knee room and leg room, and even of course headroom is much nicer in the Creta. Now, having said that, the width, there's not much difference between the two. The Creta feels slightly wider, but 3 abreast, like how we just sat, it's not that much of a difference. It's just that the sense that you get in the Creta that it is wider. The Curvv's bench seems to have better thigh support with the rounded bolstered edges. The cushioning is a bit flat in the Creta, which may tire you out on a long journey. The reclining seat has a steeper angle in the Hyundai, which some of you may like. You have the full experience of a more practical shape and a 50mm longer wheelbase in the Creta. The Curvv loses out on headroom, but Tata Motors has done its bit to carve out the roof to aid this, but 6-footers will still be much better off in the Creta. You have 2 chargers in the back of both, but the Creta again has more storage and a bigger sunroof. It's also the only one here with the all-important rear sunshades. Sadly, you don't get a middle headrest in both. Now, since we're testing the diesel versions here, it's understood that you might spend a lot of time on the highway in both of them. And I do think that the Creta is slightly better in terms of its highway manners. I feel like the smaller 17-inch wheels give it a bit more of a cushioning. The Curvv, you feel a bit more of the rough stuff. Now, that by itself is not that much of a problem because the Curvv also does a good job of giving you a slightly soft edge to it. But what is slightly more difficult to get over is the fact that the Curvv has this kind of body movement. It's constantly shimmying and shuddering a bit over uneven surfaces like we're on right now, which you see in the Creta is much better controlled. So yeah, in that sense, it feels more comfortable. And I also do think that when the going gets really tough over bad broken roads, the Creta manages itself a little bit better. Now, I also must say that both these cars feel quite solid and tough, and they seem up to whatever our conditions have to throw at them, which will be reassuring whether you pick either one of these. Priced at Rs 23.24 lakh on-road Mumbai for this accomplished Plus version, the Curvv is Rs 1.10 lakh less than the 24.34 lakh that Hyundai charges for the Creta's SXO version. This is good value considering at a smart-looking car, a long features list and better efficiency. If standing out is a priority, the Curvv is competent enough, but the Creta seems to be easier on the daily grind. It may be quite vanilla, but also just works great as a family car. You have a more inviting space, better comfort, and a more refined experience that just takes the edge here.